Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for tuning in with me today. So in today's video I am going to be doing a bittersweet eyeshadow ranking. And yes, I'm saying bittersweet because this is kind of a sad occasion. I wanted to do an eyeshadow ranking of all of my Aether Beauty eyeshadow palettes because unfortunately Aether Beauty is going out of business. And if you are following them on Instagram, you might be aware of this because they did make this sad announcement a couple of weeks ago. And I've got to say, I'm kind of upset by it, I'm kind of sad to see them go. It did not really take me too much by surprise because I was kind of like suspicious about them not really releasing any more products, and also about like them always having like such huge massive sales. And it just triggered my suspicion a little bit, but at the end of the day I'm still shocked that they are out of business. So really unfortunate news on the beauty front. Unfortunately, we are losing a really cool brand. And in case you've never been familiar with Aether Beauty, let me tell you that they were a very eco-conscious brand. So they were loved by a lot of people who are into green, clean beauty because they really did make a huge effort to make their brand super sustainable. They truly were the pioneers of the very first zero waste, fully recyclable eyeshadow palettes. And they made an effort even like, all the way up to their mascara to make it like super sustainable, to make it recyclable, and to ethically source their ingredients as well. They were also completely vegan and cruelty free. And Aether Beauty was also the very first brand that ever gave me an affiliate code at a time when I had like literally no subscribers at all. Like I might have had like 20 subscribers or something like that. And they were so kind and they gave me an affiliate code. And I will always have a sweet spot for them. They were just such an approachable, very down-to-earth beauty brand. And they really released some creative color stories. Like things that you would rarely see in the green, more clean beauty space at all. And I just love them for their creativity, for the fact that they really made an effort to come out with beautiful design, but they would not compromise on their ethics. And that's one thing until this day I really appreciate that about this brand. So just factually speaking, the very last day that you can purchase any of the palettes is going to be on June 12th. Now they have like sales up to 85%. Their palettes are now ranging from $6 to $24 at most, whereas their normal standard price for one of these palettes used to be around $48 to $58. So it's an insane sale. So in case you've never tried out the brand, this is your last chance to grab something from their official website. Now, I'm not sure if my discount code is going to work on these already heavily discounted products. I assume not. But, I don't really mind. I just really wanted to pay homage to this brand with this video and do an Aether Beauty, kind of video for the very last time probably on my channel, and it kind of saddens me, to be honest with you. So I thought I would pull out my entire eyeshadow collection and I would rank them. I'm solely going to focus on their eyeshadow palettes because I also feel like their eyeshadow palettes really were the hero sort of product that they had. Like they were known for their eyeshadow palettes. So that's what I'm going to be ranking today. I'm not going to make this ranking like super deep, I don't want this video to last forever because honestly, I have already made so many videos on some of these eyeshadow palettes. Not everything I featured on my channel because I just did not have the time to feature every single eyeshadow palette that I have by Aether Beauty. And believe me, I pretty much got all of them. Like, I feel like there's just 2 or 3 quarts that I'm missing out on. And for the rest, I've got their entire collection because they also have continuously released limited editions. They have discontinued palettes and then they have re-released them with a new formula. So a lot of these palettes are not even available anymore. So it's really just kind of more of a nostalgic sort of like ranking video. So just don't take it too personal if you are seeing a palette that you love and that I might not. This is just very much like personal preference and such. So yeah, just take it with a grain of salt. And of course, all of the palettes that are still available by the brand, I'm gonna point them out to you and let you guys know how much they are retailing for now. And before we are jumping into the ranking, I also just wanted to have mentioned I am going to do my best to link every single video that I've done on this brand where I'm using their palettes in my description box down below. So just feel free to check them out in case, you know, you would like to see a deeper review on them, you know, than this video, because I'm kind of gonna try and go through them as quick as I can, not to make this video like an hour long, because I definitely could do that. So in total, I do have 11 eyeshadow palettes by Aether. So I would just say, let's do this from the worst to the best eyeshadow palette. And yeah, let's start off with number 11. So number 11 goes to Joshua Tree Desert Matte Palette. Also, just a quick side note, Aether Beauty did change the spelling of their name. You know, back in the day, they had like these two E's in their name. So if you see the pack shot with the old name on it, you know, just rest assured it's the exact same brand. But yeah, this palette, oh my gosh. This is it, and I've got to say this, it's barely used, because I've got to say this was really not up my alley. I thought this color story was really pretty. This was an all matte eyeshadow palette, you know, inspired by the Joshua Tree Desert. My problem with this palette was that the colorful sort of shades that I was so looking forward when I purchased this palette just did not work out for me, because these mattes were just not like any of the other mattes that she had in her other palettes. These mattes were just so sheer. They were barely like washes of color, and it would just like blend and just kind of blend away. And I would constantly have to build them up and build them up, especially these colorful shades. They were just not up my alley. I will say though, these more neutral shades around here were okay. But, you know, it was a little bit pricey for the quality. And this was really just kind of a fail for me. And I really don't mind an all matte eyeshadow palette, because it could really be a great companion palette to an all shimmer palette, for example. But it was just a problem with the formulation. And it has been discontinued too. And I mean, this is no longer available at all. But let's actually move on to the next palette. Let's move on to number 10. And number 10 goes to the Manifest palette. Now, this was their last release. This was their most recent release. I actually reviewed this palette in an eyeshadow ranking video, my latest eyeshadow ranking video, you know, where I did review all of the new releases of 2023. Just came out this year, and this is also still available. If I'm not mistaken, it's kind of like, how much is it? I have to look it up. I think it's like $10 or something. Yeah, it actually is $10 at the moment. And I did pay full price for this palette, and I did not really enjoy it that much. Now, there are some nice shades in here, I've got to say, but not everything worked out the way I wanted it to work out. Also, I feel like this is just very personal, because this color story in general does not really speak to me that much. It's very sort of rosy. And it's also, you look at it and you think, oh my gosh, there are some beautiful like rosy cool tones, but they all ended up looking so warm on me. And there was something off with this formula as well. I felt like this was so powdery. This had so much kickback. Now, blended out okay, you know, you could not really tell that when you applied the eyeshadow, but it was just so powdery. And also, I've got a suspicion, I'm not sure if I'm right, but when I look at the back of this palette, it does say Amethyst Crystal Palette. And it's called Manifest Palette though. So I'm not sure if she wanted to actually re-release an older palette that was discontinued by then, which was their Amethyst palette. This really felt like she took some of the Summer Solstice palette and some of the Amethyst palette and like threw them all in one palette, because there's also this shade right here, which is like a purple with a beautiful green base that was actually already in existence in the Amethyst palette, in the original Amethyst palette that we are gonna get to when it's time to get to it, okay? This was not for me. This shade right here was like a beautiful topper shade, but it hard panned on me as well. The tone value looked so off, you know? It was just very bizarre because when you look at this palette, it looks really beautiful. Now, I did create some nice looks, but were those my favorite looks ever? Definitely not. I already talked about this more in depth in my eyeshadow ranking video, but I just wanted to have mentioned like why this is not ranking up higher. This was not for me. It's just not my thing, and it's like $10 right now. So if you still want to try it, you can still buy it, but honestly, not necessarily my favorite palette. And then number 9 is gonna go to the Desert Sunset palette. So all of the eyeshadow palettes that you've seen thus far actually came with 12 shades. Now this is the eyeshadow palette that has 10 shades, so it's a little bit smaller. She has another one that is like this. And this was also when she kind of like relaunched and had discontinued all of her existing eyeshadow palettes, and she came out with these like tan pan eyeshadow palettes in this format. Like I feel like if you have like olive toned skin, if you love gold, and if you like more like these grungy sort of neutrals, you would love this palette, okay? But for some reason, gold is not necessarily my favorite way to go. Like these are still very warm toned, and I'm more of like a cool tone sort of neutral girl, and I feel like this was very gold. Like all of these pulled like gold, or they had some gold in here. Like even this, it looked purple in the pan, and then it pulled like really like gold on my eyes. This entire color story is just not for me, okay? It's just too golden. And then also this hot pink, again like a pink. This one is even warmer. Like the other one in the Manifest palette was a little bit more neutral cool. This one is super warm and hot, and just it's just not for me. When she had released these like tan pan eyeshadow palettes, she kind of, I think she must have tweaked the formula a little bit, because I honestly feel like there was a change in formulation. It wasn't necessarily an improvement, okay? The mattes are still beautiful, but the shimmers, they are a little bit more crumbly than her older palettes, and they don't age that well. I feel like these palettes here don't age as well as my OG Aether Beauty palettes. It's just not the same anymore as it used to be. So maybe it's not just me. Let me know if you have this eyeshadow palette and if it's doing the same thing, if these shimmers have just dried out a little bit and they're not as like shiny and reflective anymore. I also just want to say they do have an expiry date of 12 months. I have so many eyeshadow palettes that are like older than that, and they don't do that necessarily. Like her very first launches, those eyeshadow palettes are still good, and they are much older than 12 months. But these tan pan eyeshadow palettes, I feel like after 12 months, they're really like giving up on me. I have ranked this palette a little bit lower just because I'm not the biggest fan of all of this gold, of like this like yellowy brown, like this olive toned, almost like brown neutral color story. However, if you do have more of a yellow undertone, or if you have an olive undertone and you do vibe with this color story, maybe you're gonna love it. So this is just me. Again, this is a very personal ranking. Still available for $15 as of right now. So let's move on to the next palette. So number 8 goes to the Topaz Mini Crystal palette. So this palette has been discontinued by now, this little quad. So the only one that is still available for $6 is the Citrine quad, and that one, I actually don't have that. I never picked that one up. Now I will say, I do love this palette though. This palette has really beautiful sort of like shades, but again, I'm not the biggest fan of like gold. And there was like definitely one gold, and this gold right here, it's more of like a green sort of gold, like a rusty gold almost. But these two shades are really pretty. The only like reason why I'm not ranking this up higher is because there is not a lot of difference in between the textures and the finishes. The only one that's a little bit more shiny is this one right here, and it's the gold, okay? But these are pretty satin. So all of them have like a similar texture. Just looking at the color story, it does make some sense, but I just felt like the finishes were a little bit too similar overall. I just wished one of those were just like a matte, the other one could have been a topper, and you know, how about like adding a metallic and a satin? Like 4 different finishes for a quad would have been so much fun, and I just feel like these finishes were just a little bit too similar, and that's why this is not ranking higher, and obviously also because there's like 2 golden shades. So let's actually move on to the next palette. Number 7 goes to the Summer Solstice palette. So this palette has been discontinued for a long time by now. This was one of the OG releases by Aether Beauty, and I mean, the color story, it's pretty. There's nothing wrong with this formula whatsoever. It is pulling very warm though. It's a very warm toned palette, quite a neutral color story with a little bit of purple in here as well. And also the shimmers in this formula did not wow me as much as in some of the other palettes. Nevertheless, it is actually a really good palette, and I'm glad I have this, because this is nowadays, it's almost impossible to find this unless someone is gonna sell this to you. And even then, it's gonna be a very old palette by now. But yeah, for me, it's just like the color story being not as like exciting as my other Aether Beauty ones. And although it's a pretty palette, you know, and it did get some use, I just feel like I did not end up like loving this, you know. In terms of formula, this was a good formula. I just felt like the shimmers were not as spectacular and as exciting as in some of my other palettes that I have by them. Alright, so let's actually move on to the next one. So number 6 is gonna go to the reformulated Rose Quartz Crystal palette. And honestly, I did not think I would rank it like number 6. I really thought this would be like really high up, but I did use this quite recently again, and it's the same issue than with the Desert Sunset palette. I love this color story, no questions. This was like the very first re-release in her new formula and in the tan pan sort of format, when she discontinued all of her existing eyeshadow palettes by then. And this was her new take on her beloved Rose Quartz palette. But what happened to mine? Mine looks so dusty after, I would say, this is a little bit older though than just a year. I probably have this palette since like what, 18 months or something. I don't know what happened to it. I'm not even sure if you can see this, but this is very dusty all of a sudden, you know. I feel like the 12 months expiration on these tan pans is for real, because when I got this, I loved this palette. Although I will say one of the things that, you know, did not wow me about it was the fact that this, in terms of like the matte shades, it just was not deep enough. Like these were all sort of like mid-tone shades. The shimmers looked so beautiful, you know. These did not really have a shift though, because in her original palette, like the shimmers actually had a shift. So when I got this, I was in love with the shade Vibes, Trust, and Karma. Like this whole sort of like more cool tone, sort of blue grayish, like right side of the palette. So stunning. I wish she would have like, you know, just swapped out one of these shades for like a deeper matte. It's still available on her website. If you're just picking this up right now and you are gonna get a brand new one, just rest assured it might not do that. I'm not even sure if yours would do that or if yours does that, but mine is just not the same thing anymore. So let's actually move on to my sort of like favorite Aether Beauty eyeshadow palettes. Like we're gonna now move on to the top 5. So number 5 goes to the Crystal Grit Gemstone palette. This was my second video on YouTube, my second review ever, and it was my very first product by Aether Beauty. It's an all shimmer palette, but it's just so fun. This was always a limited edition, but man, I really did enjoy this because this was fun. This had some really beautiful sort of shifts. Now, I would not suggest to necessarily head over to that video and have a look at that weird eye look that I did with this, because back then I was definitely not as knowledgeable about eyeshadows as I am right now. I was kind of like really amateur when it came to eyeshadow application. I just put like a ton of shades mixed all together, you know, and I did not even like have a proper eyeshadow primer. I did not even use any mattes. I was very not elegant with this palette application, okay? But nonetheless, I still love this color story. I feel like this color story is so beautiful. This shade right here, I gotta see what it's called, Intuition. Oh my gosh, this is just, let me like actually swatch this. This is so beautiful. It's like this cool tone, sort of bronzy shade, and oh my god, these are still giving me like pigment, and they are so smooth. And this was like the OG formula, like this shade Tourmaline. It's almost like this sort of like shifting gray green with a red base sort of shade. Now I will say though, these are not like the most like intense finishes, you know. It's not like super glittery. There is not like any glitter in this at all, like particles. But I would say these are more like a metallic sort of like luminous satin kind of finish, but they're very elegant. What I would have changed would have been like these two golds, like I mean, I don't really need all of these two like gold shades. Like maybe I would have switched them out with something else, maybe something a little bit more like purple pink or something. But this was fun. I really enjoyed this palette, and this palette obviously is not gonna go anywhere ever. Like I will never declutter this palette because this was the very first eyeshadow palette I ever reviewed on YouTube. Alright, so let's move on to number 4. So number 4 goes to the Amethrine Mini Crystal palette. This quad really did take me by surprise. Now it's not like something like extremely special or anything, you know, it's just 4 shades, but these 4 shades are stunning. Like I love this color story. It's like cool, muted, sort of purple, and this is exactly what I love and what I was missing a little bit in this quad. These two might have the same sort of satin formula, but this one is definitely like the glowiest out of all of them, and this is a proper matte shade. You are gonna be very limited with the look that you can do with a quad, of course. It's just 4 shades. Nevertheless, I really have to say I enjoyed this quad. It's beautiful, and I really did like the colors in here. The color story was something I enjoyed, and I will say I really reached for this, and I was surprised when I used this. Now, this has also been discontinued. I mean, again, it's more like my vibe, more like neutral sort of cool tone purple. I really do love this one. So yeah, let's move on to my top 3. And number 3 is the Amethyst Crystal Gemstone palette. So this one is also one of her OG palettes. This is the original Amethyst palette. And this color story, you guys, isn't that just beautiful? I mean, this has been discontinued by now for such a long time, but I still feel like this was just so extremely stunning. This was a color story that was relying very heavily on purples. Also some more like deeper shades in here. And sometimes that was just a little bit the missing component with some of the other palettes. Because I feel like here you really had a light shade, you had a mid-tone shade, and then you also had like deeper shades. This shade right here, it's the shade Transcendent. This shade is the shade that I was talking about, you know, the purple with this green-gray shift that she had re-released in the Manifest palette. It's the exact same shade, and it's right here, and it's like my favorite shade. I almost feel like the OG formula is still a little bit more vibrant and luminous than the Manifest one, like the newer formula. That one was just so powdery. I don't know what happened. This palette is just, the color story is so well curated. And I've got to say, I love the shifts in these. I really loved everything about this palette. It's a beautiful, stunning palette, and yeah, the color story is really up my alley. Alright, you guys, so let's move on to number 2. So number 2 is the Moon Crystal palette. So I made an entire video about this palette. This palette was released last year, so it's also like her newer formula, but for some reason this formula still seems to be fine. Now this is also like a 12 pan eyeshadow palette, but just look at that color story. That color story just speaks to my soul. And I dedicated an entire video to this, so if you're interested in this, like, go ahead and check that video out, because this is still available and this retails right now for $8. It's just such a special color story. I love this. I love like the different sort of like arrangements of tones. We have some like pink purples, like lavender shades, and then these beautiful, more sort of like bluish shades, one green, and like this minty, icy shade. I'm actually wearing this right now in my inner corner. I love that shade. That shade is just so beautiful, especially in my inner corner. I really do love it. The shade that I ended up loving the most is this one. This blue shimmer shade right here. What's it called actually? Oh, there's no names. The names are missing. And I'm not sure where the box is, because I remember I was actually holding on to the box. But this was like a blue with like a red base, or with like a purple base. It just had such a beautiful shift. There was nothing neutral about this palette, but I don't always like an all neutral look. Sometimes I find them very like boring, and then other days I love them. So I love colorful eyeshadow palettes, and I also love neutral palettes, but I like my eyeshadow palettes to be a little bit more cool toned. And I really feel like this gave me the whole fantasy. I feel like this is the most exciting one that is still available as of right now. And it retails for $8. Like, what? Okay, it's a beautiful one. I really, really do enjoy it. And I had a lot of fun with this one. Good memories, definitely. But alright, you guys, we came to the top spot, the number one spot. And there is just one palette that remains, and it's my all-time favorite Aether Beauty release. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I think this must have been their very first palette that they ever came out with. I'm not sure about that though, but I think I'm right. So number one goes to the original Rose Quartz Crystal Gemstone palette. I mean, of course, this has to be my number one. This is most definitely my most used and my all-time favorite color story, my favorite formula that Aether Beauty has ever released. I love this palette. This palette is everything I want and I love. I mean, just look at that beautiful, dreamy, romantic, cool tone, sort of like just very beautifully curated color story. I feel like this is it. This is really the gem out of this entire line. And again, you know, she had pulled this and then re-released this formula. I mean, this one already has like 12 eyeshadow pans, so it has a little bit more selection, a little bit more depth. And this one just kind of seems a little bit lackluster now in comparison to this beautiful, fun color story. Now, what you're seeing on my eyes is actually this palette. I've used this today, and I've used the shade Scorpio, this gray shade, what's this called again? Aphrodite, and Grounding. So these were the three mattes that I've used, and then I topped it off with the shade Astarte and that beautiful shade Aura. Like, these two might be like my favorite ones. I also love this one here, Crystalline. Like, I mean, I almost love every single sort of shade in this palette. This was so beautiful. I still love this. I love the look that I've created with this. And this is by now a very old palette. I'm not sure. I don't think you can find this anywhere. Maybe you'll find this somewhere like secondhand on the internet, but this formula is still going strong. Like, it's a little bit powdery. I mean, these should be good for like 12 months, but it's still working. I mean, my look turned out fine, you know. And also the shimmer still felt like really creamy and buttery when I like dipped in my finger. And with this, it just feels so dry. It feels so crumbly compared to the original formula. I really feel like this was like one of the best and most like visually appealing sort of color stories I've ever seen. And also just so like user-friendly, wearable, blended out great. You know, I mean, those were not like the most intensely pigmented eyeshadows in the world, but you could still build them up, you know. And I just love the look that I've created with this today. And this will for always have a very special place in my heart. And I will never get rid of this palette. I also just wanted to quickly mention that I did use their Cheeks palette. I don't think you can get this on sale anymore. This was their Crystal Charged Cheek palette in the colorway Ruby. And this looks like I barely used this, but rest assured I did use this quite a lot. But these are so pigmented, you don't actually need a lot of this. So I did use this shade and a little bit of that shade a little bit higher up, and this as a highlighter. This highlighter is beautiful. It's on my nose, it's right here, because I tried to use this very old one, the Supernova Crushed Diamond highlighter, and it hard panned on me. It has a massive hard pan, and although this was so beautiful, I mean, it's still giving something if I dip in my finger, but my brush was barely able to pick any of the product up because I feel like it did kind of hard pan on me. This is so old by now. But I just wanted to let you know that I also use these products. Now, I did have their mascara and their lip product. Unfortunately, those have expired by now. They are quite old by now, and the mascara, like, I don't use mascara that is older than 6 months, and the lip product was really weird because it balled up and it was definitely expired. It's kind of with a heavy heart that I'm gonna say this was probably the very last video I've ever done on Aether Beauty as a brand. So please do drop me a comment down below. What was your experience with Aether Beauty? Did you ever try any of their products out? Would you agree with my ranking? Would you rank them differently? You know, do you have a different favorite palette than I do? Please do drop me a comment down below, or in case you've never tried out this brand, are you going to pick up something in their massive sale? I would be really curious to know that. And if you found this video helpful, or if you just found it entertaining in any kind of way, why not give it a thumbs up? And also, in case you made it this far and you have not subscribed to my channel, I would love to have you here. So please don't forget to hit that button and ring the bell in order to get notified about my upcoming videos. And I shall be seeing you on here very, very soon with the next one. So until next time, please do take care. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye. Bye, Aether.